Welcome back to U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition.
Welcome back. Well, despite the Russian oil ban announced, the Biden administration is doubling down on efforts to push electric vehicles. In a tweet on Tuesday, the president said, quote, loosening environmental regulations won't lower prices, but transforming our economy to run on electric vehicles powered by clean energy will mean that no one will have to worry about gas prices, end quote. But that is not the sentiment being shared at Commodity Classic this week, in a year that typically these commodity organizations would be setting priorities for the upcoming Farm Bill. Instead, they are navigating the issues farmers are facing today. The week after wheat prices climbed 40% in a week, the whiplash in wheat continued as wheat prices saw a $2 swing in just one day.
When you have those two countries in a conflict, you are talking about a third of the world's wheat production.
National Association of Wheat Growers CEO Chandler Gould says at a time when Ukrainian farmers are typically concerned about crops, the crisis is creating many unknowns.
As the winter wheat, which is what Ukraine predominantly produces, is starting to come back to life and start to grow and head into that tillering stage, here in the next 6 weeks. If your roads are bombed out, your bridges are bombed out, you can't get into your field because maybe your field has had destruction.
National Sorghum Producer CEO Tim Lust says it's having an impact on feed grains, including sorghum.
I don't think we fully understand totally from an international picture what all this means. We know that there are many disruptions of normal trade patterns.
The extent of the damage won't be known for quite some time, but it's infrastructure that's also taking a hit.
When you look at the map of Ukraine, their biggest part of their wheat belt is definitely on that eastern border where Russia has invaded. And that's where their wheat production predominantly is.
Just this week, the U.S. and U.K. banned oil imports from Russia. The CEO of American Soybean Association, Stephen Sensky, thinks U.S.-produced biofuels are a ready-made solution to help fill the gap today.
Given the situation that's happening worldwide, given with the Russia-Ukraine situation and what a big exporter Russia is of energy, given the administration's focus on climate, we have ready-made solutions to address both of those, and that's through increasing opportunities for renewable biofuels to compete and to provide incentives and to create that space. We think it's both good for national security, and we think it's also good for the environment.
Just last week, a group of commodity and farm organizations, including National Corn Growers and National Sorghum Producers, sent a letter to the White House urging the Biden administration to allow the sale of higher blends of ethanol year-round.
Ethanol is part of the solution today. When we look at the U.S. stocks that we have, look at the price of ethanol versus the price of gasoline, we're a part of the immediate solution. And if we could get a few political barriers out of the way, that is something that we could deliver tangible results to lower fuel costs to U.S. consumers in weeks, and not months, not years, but in weeks.
From fuel inflation to food inflation, Gould says even with the abundance of world wheat stocks carrying over from last year, if you take Ukraine and Russia out of the mix this year, there are grave concerns about a shortage of food in developing countries.
Ukraine wheat is predominantly going to, Egypt, Turkey, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Philippines. And so it's those developing countries and some of the countries in Africa that are very dependent on that lower cost wheat than the high quality wheat that we produce here in the United States.
Just this week, the Philippines made purchases of U.S. wheat, and China came to the U.S. for more soybeans, a possible sign that fears of crop shortages are already at play.
We look at our strong international demand tied to China, bought a couple of more boats announced yesterday. Certainly have heard of some large U.S. corn purchases. And a lot of that really tied, I think, to the fact that in China's case, a fair amount of Ukraine grain certainly does go into Russia.
Even with the snow blanketing portions of the Western Plains this week, another growing concern is drought, as dry conditions blanket nearly 60% of the U.S., the most since 2012.
We have a lot of wheat acres that, are in really bad shape. And so, a lot of unknown right now related to a wheat crop in the Western Plains as well, and what that might look like and how that might impact acres going into summer as well.
And for 2022, it's not just weather, but input issues as the situation in Ukraine and Russia is causing fertilizer prices to climb once again.
Supply inputs is another part of the discussion. I'm happy to say we have a very good seed supply and very solid seed supply. Most of our chemicals, I would say, are in really good shape in sorghum. Probably better than I can say related to some other crops.
Wheat growers also say the low input crop plays into wheat acres' favor, but the acreage debate is far from over for this year.
It was starting to really send signals before the Russia-Ukraine crisis that we needed to increase soybean acres. The corn-soybean ratio was creeping up in favor of soybeans. Of course, with high fertilizer prices, that might impact some of the farmers' decisions.
Sinskey says the crisis in Ukraine may prompt some producers to look at more corn or wheat, but overall, he still expects an expansion in U.S. soybean acres this year, even as EPA decisions are weighing on crop producers coast to coast.
We've been very concerned about making sure that the regulatory decisions that are made by government agencies, and really we're talking a lot about the EPA here, is science-based, and they're not taking tools out of farmers' hands.
Sinskey says from crop chemistry to pesticides, ASA is concerned recent EPA decisions are driven by public opinion, not science.
As we face these supply chain challenges, that was our message to EPA. You cannot be making changes at this point in the growing season to take these tools away when already the price of herbicides is in short supply. They've doubled, tripled from what they were last year. You add that to the fertilizer price increases, we want to make sure that they're not taking tools away.
While farmers are seeing a run-up in commodity prices, it's not something farmers are necessarily celebrating.
We're not out of the woods, and the USDA also is predicting a 7.9% decrease in farm income next year, looking at all of this additional cost of production outside of what the invasion of Russia into Ukraine is doing to our markets.
As planters roll in southern and central Texas, it's a reminder the growing season is already here for some.
Nobody is very confident about, the changes in the world in the last 2 weeks have not made the supply chain situation better. They've potentially made it worse.
Well, commodity groups also say that over the next couple months, if Ukraine and Russia don't get their crops planted, then it's an entirely different conversation about the global supply of grain. All right, when we come back talking about the supply of grain, our marketing roundtables kick back off. Chip Flory, Arlen Suderman, and Chip Nellinger rejoin me next.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Germinator Closing Wheels. Germinator, it's not just any closing wheel. Reach your yield potential. Pre-order by March 31st with coupon code USFR for $2 shipping per wheel.